I will start with the agenda. Here is the flow of our discussion. I'll briefly describe the housing crisis in America. There are two issues. One is the affordability, and the other one is the homelessness. The affordability issue is due to the supply and demand issues, and that aspect will be covered by our speaker, the CEO of Community Housing Project, Mr. Janat Kasper. And the homelessness issue, there are a couple of approaches that John Linkard has tried, so he will share his experience. And I will also share a short video of Conestoga Hut project that was presented, that was worked on one of our fellow Proutists, David Quell. Unfortunately, he could not be here with us today, so he sent a short video that I will share at the towards the end. So next slide. So reason for homelessness.
Just suggestion, you might want to actually start the presentation so that it's more full screen.
Okay, let me do that. Is that good?
Yep, yeah, that's better.
So, so there are several reasons why people become homeless. Generally, it is because of, let's say, lack of jobs or some financial difficulties, bankruptcy. That is one aspect, financial aspect. And then there are substance abuse, mental illness. And then there are like affordability issues that are caused by some financial difficulties. So that actually causes the homelessness. I read one article a few days ago where there was a person who was like suffering from a schizophrenia, and he preferred to be homeless. So that is some of the rare situations. And then I read another article in New York Times where the reporter was interviewing people on the homeless people, and he did find some ex-teachers, truck drivers, and factory workers who ended up being on the street because they had to declare bankruptcy because of the exorbitant medical bills. So there are many reasons why this unfortunate situation happens. So I will share some facts on the homelessness. So roughly about over half a million people, Americans, go homeless on every single night in the United States. Around 200,000 sleep in the unsheltered areas like the streets, under the overpass, or the parks, or the illegal encampments. And about 350,000 people find themselves in some kind of an emergency shelter or transitional housing program. The state of California leads the homeless people, followed by New York and Florida. And about 25% of nation's homeless live in California. California being a very densely populated state and also being very high cost, probably that's why there are so many homeless people in California. I think the New York also is the same way. The rental and home ownership, there are some issues here, which is that it's again a question of supply and demand. So because of the pandemic, there was a supply issue of the building materials. And so that actually caused some delay in the construction of existing homes. And also because of the supply chain issues, the raw materials or the house building materials became more expensive. So so not only the pandemic caused delay in the construction of existing homes, but um, it also made the new homes more expensive. And meanwhile, when the new supply of new homes became a little bit scarcer, the existing home became even became more expensive. And so to take advantage of this situation, the private investors sort of like came into this scene, and they started buying homes for investment purposes. So that actually priced the first-time home buyers out of the market. So that is the really kind of like a supply-demand issue that is being caused by this situation. And because of this rise in the cost of the rental as well as the mortgage amount, the wage actually is not keeping up with this price increase. And so people with minimum wage jobs are finding it difficult to afford safe housing. So that caused there's a significant gap between renters' wage and cost of the rental housing. Now, according to hard guidelines, no more than 30% of a person's income should go towards housing, which is the accepted standard of affordability. So, so we have categorized actually the housing into the two aspects. One is the affordable housing, the affordable rentals, and affordable home ownership. So that is one aspect of the problem. Another is obviously the people, because of the misfortune, I mean, they end up being homeless. So so what are the solutions to that? So Janak actually will address the affordable housing. His organization is providing the affordable housing in the Southeast and the Mid-Atlantic states. And John Linkhart will present his experience with some work that he has done with the homeless people or the unhoused people. And in the end, I will share one video that is also being used for homeless people. It is kind of a unique project. It is called Conestoga Huts. I will share that towards the end. So those are the two solutions that we will present. There are many other approaches like the community land trust. There are housing co-ops, but we will not have time to really go into those different solutions. So here our presentation is really more focused on these two aspects. So the availability is really right now is very bad. I mean, the situation is very dire. According to one report, there are only like a 23 affordable house available for every 100 low-income households. That is according to the Urban Institute. So to change this situation, I think we need to change our zoning laws, because there are many counties where the residents actually does protest against changing the zoning rules, because nobody wants the low-income housing in their neighborhood because it may reduce the property values of their area. So that is the challenge that we face. In California and Oregon recently passed a zoning law to allow multifamily housing. Prior to that, California, the LA County had 76% of residential land was only or meant for single family housing, whereas that number for San Francisco Bay Area was a staggering 85%. So I think it is a step in the right direction. Hopefully other states may soon follow in that direction. So here I will introduce a couple of terms. One is called fair market rent, and the other one is the housing wage. So the fair market rent is an estimate of what a family can expect to pay for a modestly priced rental home in a given area. It is provided by HUD. And the housing wage is the amount of money that one needs to make to be able to afford the fair market rate in his or her area. So for example, in your area, the fair market rent is $700. And the person or the family makes $2,000 a month. So 30% of that is $600. So obviously the family is not earning enough housing wage to afford the fair market rent in that area. So one study actually has found that to afford a modest 2-bedroom rental home, the housing wage, the hourly housing wage is about $26. And for a 1-bedroom rental home, the wage has to be about $21. Now, given that the federal minimum wage is $7.25, although there are some private companies are paying $15, but it still is far lower than what really people need to make to afford a modest 2-bedroom rental home. So that is the reason why people are working 2 jobs or sometimes 3 jobs to longer hours to make up for that gap. I have read somewhere that about a family for be able to afford modest 2-bedroom rental home, they need to work something like 97 hours per week, which is a staggering amount of work every week. I just found out that early June, there are estimated 14 million people who are behind on rent or mortgage payments. And of that, 5 million adults are going to likely lose their residence either through eviction or foreclosure. So obviously, this situation is really getting worse. And so as we said, there are 2 solutions we are presenting here. One of them will be a solution to affordable housing, will be presented by the Janak Casper, who is the CEO of Community Housing Partners. So I will now hand it over to Janak. Let me bring up his presentation. Let me share. I have to new share.
Thank you so much. And that background information ties in to the one federal program that produces multifamily rental communities for low and moderate income families. We are currently approved to do a project we're calling Legacy on Main. It happens to be right across the street from where I live. It's on the corner of South Main Street, close to both shopping. You can see it in the upper right-hand corner, and there's a bus stop there. The community we're going to build this development in is called Blacksburg, Virginia. It's a large university, Virginia Tech, that's located in the community, a population of about probably now 45 to 50,000 people, and 30,000 of which are students at Virginia Tech. So next slide. Just a quick overview of who we are. We were founded in 1975. Took volunteers from the university and went out in the community in Blacksburg and did home repairs. I came on board in 1976 and will retire, as I'm hearing maybe a theme of this also, in January of next year. But we serve 6 states. So we're a regional nonprofit organization. Next. Some of the things that we do, again, are sustainable development and construction. We provide resident services, property management. We have an energy division that specializes in making homes, both rental and owner, low-income rental and owner-occupied homes more energy efficient. And then we believe in home ownership, and particularly market to people that live in our rental communities. Next. Sustainability is really a vital goal for us. So all of our design and building techniques are with energy conservation in mind, because we're restricted 100% to serving low and moderate income families. And we realize that any dollars saved on energy consumption can go to more needy activities. Next. You can skip that. So here's a site plan of the project. It's on 2.6 acres. Like I described, it sits right next to a strip mall, and has access to bus transportation, which will be helpful as well. This required a zoning change, and hence the reason I thought this would be an important conversation to have with you folks is we won a tax credit award. Like I said, the primary production program for affordable rental in this country is called the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program. The way that program works, states get allocation of federal credits. Developers put together a project that includes a limited partnership that basically, when given that award through a competition of those federal credits, you sell them to a limited partner that buys those credits, gives you the money to basically subsidize about 60% of the cost of the development. Then the remainder of that is either made up with other federal resources like community development block grants or home dollars or a variety of source of soft money. But the primary other source is a mortgage or loan money that makes up typically about 40%. So for that, that investor gets those federal tax credits over a 10-year period of time. Then they exit the partnership. And the restriction on who that project can serve is there for a total of 30 years. So it's mandatory, affordable for 30 years. Additionally, it targets people at 60% of the area median income. And it is rent restricted to be affordable at that 30% number of for a family based on number in their family, 1 to 6 or however many. In our area, the area median income is $86,000 for a family of 4. A 3-bedroom apartment, again, has to be targeted to people earning no more than 60% of that $86,000. and a typical 3-bedroom could not rent for more. We're rent restricted to no more than $1,344 for a 3-bedroom. A 2-bedroom would be $1,164. The competition for those credits, the bottom line is you typically target some at 60% and then some at 50 and 40 and 30, and you're awarded points in our state, in Virginia anyway, for the lower the incomes that you can serve. But naturally, from a development perspective, to be able to pay a mortgage, you've got to have the rental income to be able to afford that. So it's a big juggling act to try to serve the lowest income and yet be able to afford a mortgage with, in particular in these times, escalating supply costs, material costs, supply chain, labor costs are escalating. We've seen escalations of 30 and 35% over projects that we just did 2 years ago. So that's the basic dynamic. Next slide. You can go, okay, so that gives you an idea. This is 3-story, the topography falls out. So on the right-hand side, it's actually 4 stories. We're able to get through a zoning change, a total of 56 units on this particular property. Next slide. And this is just going to show a couple of views of this. This is the existing, this is called Country Club Drive. There's a little 9-hole community golf course up the road. It's obviously overgrown and wooded. Next slide. So this would be that improved site. You can just flip through these. This is, again, renderings of what that might look like. This is a view from a neighborhood that came out in opposition to this zoning change. Next. 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 This is a view from Main Street. Basically, you saw a cookout there. So it's a predominant site. We had 600 of my neighbors sign a petition in opposition to this development. They claim that traffic would be a tremendous problem. We actually did 2 traffic studies. Actually, there was minimal increase in the traffic on Country Club Drive. Across Main Street from us, there are 400 units of market rate housing going in. There was only 1 person that turned out in opposition to that market rate development. There were, again, 600 people that signed a petition in opposition to our development and basically claimed that it would increase traffic, that it wasn't safe to walk on the sidewalks, that people would allow their children to play in the street. So my point of saying all of that, in the end, we did prevail. We had unanimous votes at the Planning Commission, and we had a 4-3 vote at Town Council approving this project. But I think in this country, it's not only the economics of trying to do this kind of development, that it's our mission to do that. But when we ran into the kind of opposition that that we had on this project with literally some death threats, people picketed town council on this. They turned out in opposition to it and vowed to vote people out of office if they approved it. And my point of saying all of that is people are afraid of people with lower incomes. And they believe they should not be seen, heard, or be able to live in the same community as they live in. And it was pretty devastating for me personally to hear the rhetoric around people. There were shop owners and university professors, and so people that work closely with some of their employees potentially could live here. Clearly at the university, any of the people that were in service jobs could and come qualify to live in this community. These units will be more energy efficient than the homes they live in. History tells us all of these people will be great neighbors. Their children will not, in fact, play in the street because those parents care for their children just like any other parent does. So my point again of saying all of that is the major production program in this country meets opposition from existing community members throughout this country. In every community, this is not unique. We're at a point in this country where the unknown about our neighbors is keeping us from accepting people in our communities, and the expectation is they commute in from some other place. In fact, many people said they understood in Blacksburg, any home that comes up for sale is typically immediately purchased by investors. The reason for that is the university is expanding its undergraduate level student body. So those homes in every neighborhood in Blacksburg, those homes are purchased, converted to student rental, and rented to students at anywhere from $700 to $1,200 a bedroom. And as you can imagine, students that team up, 3 students can come in then and afford a home much more than a working family. So those are some of the questions that that face communities. That's the reason I think they approve this. The town actually understands they've got a tremendous affordable housing deficit in their community, and many of the commissioners put their necks on the line. We'll see next election. I expect multiple people to be defeated in the next election. Fortunately, we can't get our permit revoked, and we will start construction after the first of the year to add again a total of 56 units.
Oh, that's a real challenging work.
So just one other quick thing. You mentioned community land trust. We also just got approved in our community. We're doing about a 50 unit for sale affordable community, and we formed a community land trust to own that land to where it'll be perpetually, the land will be held in trust. So it'll at least suppress the escalation of cost on the land portion of those homes. And then we have a model of shared equity to where people won't be captive. They'll be able to sell their homes, and typically even in land trust, people sell homes after 7 years, which is the national average, that most people own that first home for a period of 7 years. So that's another way we're trying to attack the problem of affordability in our community. Is we got county and town support to support us in doing a land trust for home ownership. So I'll open it up for questions at the end or whenever.
There are questions for you in the chat.
Okay, let me look here. I would tell you, well, I would ask a question back. How many of you went from graduating from high school, college, whatever, going to work and owning a home versus going into rental housing? Typically, rental housing is that stepping stone to home ownership. And that's why my organization wants to work on both sides of that. It wants to do home ownership because that is a true equity building model, is to be a homeowner. Unless you hit a heavy recession and have to sell during a recession, you could lose money. You also, as a homeowner, you're responsible for the upkeep. You got to be able to afford to replace that roof, and 20 to 25 years, that HVAC system in the same period of time. You've got to call the plumber when the commode stops up. You've got to replace your appliances. So, and I'm not arguing against that, but people that are ready ought to be homeowners. But rental housing is the, in my opinion, the starter housing. And again, if that rent is capped to where they're only paying 30% of their income for their rent, and utilities are included in that, that's a place to where hopefully they can have safe, decent, affordable housing, and then save a little bit of money for home ownership.
It might be, perhaps I can read the question, and so everybody can hear the question. Next one, and I think we might want to limit it. John Linkhart, perhaps would you like to do your presentation before we do many more questions?
That may be productive, to just get all the material shared with the people in attendance.
I agree.
And it may invite some other questions as well. So,
Okay. Well, why don't we hold
yeah.
off then? And John, why don't you proceed, and then perhaps more than one of you can jump in on a question.
Okay. I just can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I apologize. Where I'm visiting family right now, the Wi-Fi system is out in the entire area until late this evening. I guess I wanted to touch on a couple of variables that are impacting, the housing crisis or helping create it, and then touch on some local experience that folks have had in Eugene. I guess a couple of the factors, many of them have been touched on, but a couple that weren't addressed is that we're having some significant demographic shifts in the United States. Many people are going into retirement, which often computes to downsizing from a home, maybe relocating to a different part of the country. I think another big thing that impacted housing in many ways was the pandemic and many employers discovering that a fair number of their workforce members could actually be quite productive working from home. And when that became a reality, I think more and more people started moving to places of, lower cost, for housing and other things, maybe smaller communities or places in areas that they would prefer to live in. And I think one other thing I just mentioned in passing is short-term rentals in some areas have really started taking a lot of housing off of the market because people invest in the property and they can generate more income doing the short term rather than actually having people become, long-term residents in the property. I guess I just also wanted to touch on, and I think a couple of you have mentioned this, but there's a significant swing right now in the United States in terms of just investment, kind of just classical rentier kind of approach to housing. Real estate investment trusts have been around a long time, but there's a couple of other, I guess, people or organizations jumping into the market. Mark mentioned that I have a background in healthcare management. And one of the things that we're starting to see that's sort of an interesting development is part of that industry. I mean, the healthcare industry is almost 20% of the GDP in the United States. But some of the players in that, providers and payers, are trying to address some of the determinants of health outcome, things like housing or food insecurity, transportation issues, et cetera. So just a couple of examples to give you a sense of what's happening in that. Kaiser Permanente, many of you may be familiar with that, a major presence in California, established a Thriving Communities Fund. They funded that at $400 million. Their plan is to own 30,000 units. United Healthcare, another major player in the industry, has invested $800 million and presently owns about 19,000 housing units. CVS Pharmacies, one of the major competitive pharmacies nationwide, has invested $114 million in primarily in affordable housing. The other players that I think might be helpful for people to be aware of, some of you may be familiar with Zillow. It's an alternative real estate listing service. Many people don't know that it started buying into the market, intending to either flip homes, do small, mostly cosmetic improvements and put it back on the market at a big markup, or turn it into a rental. That company lost $880 million in that effort. And as of earlier this year, they still own 10,000 units or so and have been selling them off in huge lots. I mean, other investors come in and buy 2,000 homes in a single contract. But Zillow, and this kind of puts it in perspective for some of us, is a $10 billion company, and it was simply too small to play in that game. Blackstone is actually the biggest U.S. based landlord in the country. And to put it in perspective, Zillow is 10 billion, Blackstone is 325 billion. Via their subsidiaries, they have about 80,000 units with one, 30,000 units with another, 17,000 units with a third. They've been investing at the rate of, and I think it's dropped off some now, but at the rate of like $100 million per week. BlackRock, kind of related to Blackstone, if some of you know the history of the founders of both, is one of the biggest asset management firms in the entire world. Aladdin, which is an acronym, is their tech platform. And that platform is managing $21 trillion worth of assets worldwide, and it has massive access to real estate information worldwide. Some people call BlackRock the fourth branch of government because it actually writes the software for central banks, et cetera. And what some people that are really tracking that market are saying is that at the current rate, and by the way, much of those investments goes into low and intermediate housing because they can buy up more units and just start dominating a local marketplace. And then, you know, the market rate is what they decide it will be. So it's just a major presence, and some people are saying at the current rate we're on our way back to sort of feudalism because just a few companies are well on their way of, you know, just absorbing so much of the available housing. I want to shift to a couple of things. In other words, I just want people to be aware of that's a major change that's really beginning to have an impact on housing. But in Eugene, and Mark mentioned it, we have the dubious distinction of being the highest per capita rate of unhoused people, you know, people living on the street anywhere in the country. And I think Tapan is going to show some program. David Quayle is a local Proutist who was involved in the Conestoga Huts project. And I think he was, like Tapan said, was unable to attend, but Tapan is going to share a video that he provided. But another project that I'm familiar with is entitled Everyone Village. It was actually inspired by Community First Village in Austin, Texas. And in passing, I will note, some of you may know Peter Fleury, an architect who lives in Austin, but has been very active in the community, and among other things has started a number of community gardens and farms. And through those, he was able to support that project. But Everyone Village was founded basically by two people. One fellow's a pastor in a church. He goes just by the name Pastor Gabe most of the time. And he got recognized because with the unhoused population, many of those people would hang out in areas of town that was having a detrimental impact on small business, local businesses. And he was able to establish, you know, sort of negotiate some peace between the homeless and those small businesses, and thereby got some recognition as someone that can be sort of a solution-oriented person. And then Heather Solanke is a woman that has just incredible background working in issues around housing and community efforts and everything. And so the two of them were able to, I guess, finesse a number of things that really created a pretty impressive project. There's a company named Rexius that basically they provide soil and mulch and compost and things like that. They had a 3.5 acre parcel that they've donated the use of, not the title to, but the use of for this Everyone Village. A neighbor right there, or owner, had a 3,500 square foot warehouse that is donated for the use of that project. And they basically set up, you know, some of the huts, tiny homes, there's repurposed RVs. One of the big things about that is it's a safe, sheltered community with 24/7 staffing that, you know, addresses, as I think Tapan mentioned, some people that are unhoused have various health issues and challenges. And so the resources are there to support those people. The other major thing that assisted that project was the city council. And I might mention in passing that virtually anyone in elective office is feeling pressure about housing, the housing crisis, which is nationwide, in fact, goes beyond the country. And so they are just desperate for solutions because so many of the solutions end up taking, you know, you have thousands of people on the street and you put a project together and you take 100 of them off the street. And so I think many of them one city council member in Eugene commented that we have to think much bigger than we have been historically. So I think everyone's desperate. But in any case, what's interesting about Everyone Village is Heather actually attended a Prout seminar in Eugene, which are occasionally put on, and was impressed with the principles of Prout. And thereby, when this Everyone Village was being undertaken, she asked a couple of people that are very active Proutists in the community to sit on the board and be advisors to assist them with developing this project along Prout principles. And so two of them, tremendous background, both of them PhD holders, excellent background in organizing, business management, et cetera, were able to really provide some very positive and useful input. In fact, along with Heather, one of the key staff members was also a Proutist. And so they were able to get this started. One of the tasks that the two consulting Proutists contributed was, the city council actually agreed to fund 8 positions, full-time positions, to staff the program. And the sort of conundrum was, how do you write position descriptions that allow the flexibility that a evolving community like that needs in terms of the staffing, skill sets, but look like a more traditional position description that people living in a bureaucracy are used to seeing. And they were able to negotiate that and come up with something that the city approved and has provided them the ability to be flexible. But one of the other lessons learned that I would share, and I'm not sure one of those two people may be on this, but because I'm not able to log in, I can't see who all's in attendance this evening. But one of the lessons learned was ultimately that project became a church. And as things evolved, some of the circumstances, there were some sort of ideological differences. And ultimately, Heather ended up leaving, the other staff person ended up leaving. I think maybe really to Heather's credit, if you ask her, she would say the project is successful, but it's kind of moving in its own direction and not necessarily one that we would advocate as Proutist. And so I guess the lesson there is to be really clear about who you are working with, and are there ideological compatibilities in terms of what you're trying to achieve. And the final two things I would mention is it kind of goes both ways. Oregon, many years ago, passed an urban boundary kind of limitation. They were trying to prevent, urban sprawl and development of a lot of rural land that's around communities, which was a positive thing in one respect. Now, years later, some communities are sort of bumping up against those limits. And that's one of the things that some of us have been trying to address or are aware of, is how do you start releasing some of those areas compliant with the intent, but allowing development. The other thing that Oregon has done is that they passed some legislation called middle housing. And what that's actually referring to, and I think a couple of other people have alluded to this, is the ability to take what has been zoned as a single family home to actually allow building additional units, like ADUs, if you're familiar with that, additional units for like grandparents or, someone else to generate income for a homeowner, are very difficult. The licensing, fees are just phenomenal. And basically that law was passed to make it much easier to develop more units per acreage in a community, which is really the way people used to live anyway. But anyway, I think that's some of the really major things that I wanted to touch on. I want to be sensitive to our time here. So I think maybe it'd be good to move to questions at this point if people want to follow up. Oh, and I guess, yeah, back to you, Tapan, for the video.
Yeah, so video is just a 5-minute video, so let me just show that. Mm, mm.
We're Gary and Sherry Newman, and we've been living here. It'll be 2 years this March, and we are blessed to be here. We were under a bridge. We met Eric, he got us in here, and we were up on a platform with a tent like this for a whole year before we got in here. This Conestoga hut makes it so much easier. And it's totally waterproof. It's very comfortable. You can fix them up the way you want to. You can put posters up. We would have had it real tiny and real cute if we would have known you were coming, but we didn't know till like 5 minutes before you got here. We are blessed to be out of the weather and to have our place safe where we're not stolen from. And we'd like to give back to the community, help around the camp. My husband's a groundkeeper, and he's one of the managers. And we work on the work crews, and we pull weeds, we do garbage cleanup, we do whatever the city has for us. This is our common tent, and it's where we eat our meals together, or we do guard duty because we have 24-hour guard duty on this gate to make sure everybody's safe and nobody jumps the fence. We got a solar panel, and this is our charging station in here. This is our common area. We have running water. It's cold. You have to heat it on the stove if you want hot water. But we all keep this place clean. If you mess it up, you clean it up. We have food donations. We have common utensils and dishes and stuff like that. And we all just keep this place clean, and you can have a hot meal anytime you want. People kind of pay for it with their own food stamps and stuff. Like once a month, we'll have a big camp dinner where everybody just pitches in. We have just a big potluck. There's a huge waiting list, and there's so many waiting to get into these camps. We hope you can open them soon.
I see you've got some railway tracks in behind you there. Do they disturb the camp very much?
You really get used to them. They do once in a while, but the engineers are pretty clued in about not sounding their horn right when they go by. Once in a while, you might have one that does. You just get used to them. The rules are in place to protect and to make things run smoothly, but the rules that we've got in place are working pretty well.
There are currently 17 basic rules in here. Sometimes a rule has 2 or 3 different parts. What this represents is a long process of trial and error. Eric, the director, and the organization of community-supported shelters and the people in the camp, we've tried lots of different rules at various times. And we've gotten to the point where we just have the rules that work.
And we have meetings every 2 weeks, and anybody can voice any concern that they're concerned with the camp, and it'll be heard.
The bottom line is we're all brothers and sisters.
In the summertime, we have gardens and stuff. We have quite a good vegetable rendering. We had all these rocks. I had all this paint. I wanted to do something beautiful for the garden. I've been doing artwork since I was 5 years old. It's fun. I love to do it. It gives me something to do, and I just love to create. I did that one for my daughter, Kindy. She was killed in a car wreck almost 3 years ago. I'm really glad you got to come, because you might be able to open these places for people out there who really need them.
Well, that's the end of the video for David's project.
It's anybody's guess, but more or less, this is a story about whiteness. And my skin, you know, it's white as snow. I take it with me everywhere.
Okay. Well, thank you. Let's see. We are actually at our allotted time. I think I would like to take time for questions. Before we do that, let me just quickly mention what we have coming up so people know. On September 8th, we will have a presentation by Andy Douglas, who's been volunteering with his local prison. And he's going to share insights about our criminal justice system. And I'm sure he'll be suggesting pertinent reforms that are needed. And October, we'll be looking at presentation by Mark Friedman, another Mark Friedman, who actually has been in elected office, and he'll have something to say about how Prout can use the election process and elected office to move forward a more just world, as is envisioned by Prout. Okay. Tapan, how would you like to handle this? Would you like me to read the questions that are in the chat? Would you like to do that, or?
Why don't you do that, if that's okay?
Okay. And then if people would like to raise hands also, if they just want to offer their question verbally, I think that would be okay too. This is a rather involved question from Alan Rosen about LIHT deals. I'm not sure what LIHT, what all the words in that abbreviation are, but it has to do with the tax credit market that came from that Janika shared, that helped finance his project. So with those deals, what is he's asking what the rate of return is for limited partners who buy the tax credits. There's several of these. Janak, can you?
Yes, so that varies by where the project is located. It's actually, there's a market around the sale of those credits. They're syndicated by various groups and sold to banks, corporations, etc. They do get a rate of return. Typically right now, those credits are selling for between 86 and 94 cents on the dollar. So they're paying 86 to 94 cents for a dollar worth of federal tax credit. They get that value over a 10-year period. The property has to be in compliance for a period of 15 years, or there is recapture clauses if you don't follow the rules strictly. So, you know, that price can go up and down. We've done a couple of projects in Northern Virginia where actually the investors paid more than $1 for the credit. And the way that economic works is basically they get what's called a community reinvestment credit. If they're a bank, they get examined by the feds and have to invest in local communities. So it's a complex system, but the bottom line is it's a market. As a developer, you go out and check with various people and their prices and try to get as much as you can get for the sale of those credits.
Okay, let's try to go through the rest of this question a little bit quickly. What percentage of the affordable housing gap is closed by the county club LIHTC project?
It's less than 10%. I mean, there's an overwhelming need, but we take that one step at a time. It's 56 more units than we would have had otherwise, but they have a tremendous need in our community for the affordable units.
Okay, well, it's good that it's there. How do you think the lack of living wages and student debt load borne by college graduates is impacting the affordability situation?
Oh, and students definitely come out with high debt, makes it very difficult for them to be a homeowner because that's part of their debt calculation. So they're not going to be a homeowner, forces them to rental housing, and then they'll be like anyone else in terms of being able to afford the rent in their area, realizing again, portions of their income are going to be paying off that student debt.
Sure, sure. So this is perhaps the underlying current of the opposition that's maybe unspoken, but this question looks to deal with it kind of directly. Is there a racial component to the objections of those who opposed your proposal for affordable housing?
It's probably not the primary. It's really income based. People are very frightened with people with less wealth than they have. I don't get it myself, but
yeah. Any change that neighbors see, or this is more of an observation that perhaps people can see that regarding property values, they see it as a threat to their life savings.
That is one of the things that it was spoken out loud, that their property values would go down. The truth is actually the opposite is true. We had already built a 4-unit project in this same neighborhood, and we've got direct evidence that it increased the values of the properties around them. These are not cheap units. These are expensive units because, again, of all of the energy conservation measures that are incorporated into them.
Is there a breakdown of percentage of causes of homelessness due to a lack of jobs, substance abuse, and affordability? I don't know if Tapan, if you can tackle that one.
No, actually, that's a good question. One thing that I found is that this data is very hard to find. So these are all kind of like a guesstimates. And so it is kind of hard to find out this breakdown. And I still need to do some more research to see if there are any agencies who really kind of are into this kind of information gathering. So the answer is no, actually, we do not have that breakdown.
Again, kind of a comment, housing as investment, seeking profit as opposed to providing affordable housing as a primary goal of housing. So I don't know if any of you have a comment about that.
Yeah, this is John. I think that is the trend right now, that it's the very wealthy corporations and individuals are finding, I think the biggest farm owner in the United States is Bill Gates. So I think a lot of people with substantial means are seeing real estate as a really solid investment for the long term. And I mentioned some of the big players in the healthcare industry. It looks nice, and it probably does actually help mediate some of the challenges for people, that are struggling. But I think it's also a hedge against, it's an additional revenue stream for them, and especially a hedge if they start getting successful in improving health, then that diminishes revenue on one side of the ledger, but maybe offsets it by having housing. And so I think, I don't want to be too critical of what they're saying, but I do question it a little bit. But that's what they're saying. But I think, yeah, we're living in a period where fundamental systemic change is what's needed, and otherwise, the monopoly board is getting to be owned by fewer and fewer players, and once you have that kind of stranglehold on the market is what you say it is, and so. But that's just a comment I guess I would contribute.
So if I could add around new production, adding homes versus existing housing stock, inclusionary zoning, to where you require a percentage of new development to be affordable, is one way to attack the problem. And then in even lock gate wealthy communities, if you have affordable units, that's going to add to it. Otherwise, the profit motive is going to drive, and the more expensive 10% profit on $1 million home is a lot different than a 10% profit on a $100,000 home. So you can see the motivation is to build more expensive. But if you're required to get the zoning to be able to have affordable, that's a way to add affordable units.
Maybe
I think part of that too.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think part of that also is to force or include mandates for common areas, parks and things like that really go to quality of life. Because at the price of just raw land, it's just what Janak's saying, that the incentive just to get a return on investment is to build for the higher end, and not at the entry level or working class, lower to middle, class income people. But yeah, you've got to create some mechanism that encourages or requires that kind of more diverse development. By the way, another thing on the question about the unhoused, at least in this part of the country, there's often a perception that these are people that came from somewhere else. And at least in the Eugene area, the reality is many of them are quite local. This area has experienced some serious fires where some small towns are simply gone now. And so that displaced a number of people, but it's not, it's that thing again about the other, someone we don't know. And the reality is these are people that many of whom have been in this community for years, and circumstances have put them on the street.
I have a question to Janak. Does your developments ever have to deal with any Section 8 voucher type issues?
The low-income housing tax credit program does not bring with it Section 8 vouchers, but that clearly, in my way of thinking, is a way to attract, to solve the problem of affordability. It's basically you need to subsidize on the rent side, because the cost of construction is the same for a high-end unit as a lower income unit, other than granite countertops.
Mm-hmm.
But the way to really get to affordability for lower incomes, lower than 60%, down to 20, 10 or 30% would be through voucher programs and subsidize the rent. Those programs are not expanding though. Those, we're lucky to keep the number of vouchers that are out there. And typically there are 3, 4, and 5-year waiting lists for those programs in most communities.
There's a point in the chat, maybe Prakash can address this, is whether we are saving the chat remarks along with these presentations. Is that being done? I'm not sure how that's done.
So there is a question, the comment in the chat, should tiny home village be part of the solution? I think so, yes, because I did read somewhere that once you give people a private space of their own, I think that is much more healing, because being homeless is a very traumatic situation. All of a sudden, you lose your address, you lose a place to live, you lose a place to shower. So where you, where the tiny home village type style properties actually does provide you some level of privacy, and I think that is very useful.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Sri Raksha has comments, perhaps looking at a more fundamental Prout perspective, noting that a lot of people are with a lot of disposable income are buying multiple houses for income purposes. And perhaps the problem is that what we really need is limits on wealth, that perhaps that should not be allowed. So she ends up asking, have Proutists invested time and energy in outreach to elected officials and local governments to advocate for such laws? That would be limiting the number of homes that people can own.
So a friend of mine, it's probably been 20 years ago, coined a bumper sticker that said houses, everyone should get one before anyone gets two. And I thought that was really telling.
Like that.
I mean, some of the challenges are that, for example, the minimum wage is not increased in like 20 something years. And so it's very difficult in our current divided political situation to increase support, economic support for the lowest income. But there's a tremendous amount of support for all kinds of incentives for those who have great wealth to get more. So that's the core issue driving all of this, is this growing inequality. You know, the housing crisis is a reflection of that growing inequality, because the crisis has been incredibly profitable for those who are benefiting from that. So maybe a few benefit tremendously and most are harmed. So that's the sort of the basic moral dilemma, is that it isn't just a technical or construction or financial problem. It's really an ethical and moral problem that we say we should, our highest priority is to prioritize the accumulation of wealth to any extent, but that to give benefits for those who have very little, there's a tremendous resistance to doing that. And that's, so long as we have that sort of basic dynamic, we really won't be fundamentally able to address the housing crisis.
I would jump in and sort of support that. To Raksha's question, there's this concept of the Overton window, which is about, you know, what's politically feasible at any given time. And her suggestion is very consistent with Prout, but kind of to Prakash's point, that's not even feasible for the most part, which is going to require a movement, you know, to really start creating pressure on elected officials, you know, to make it feasible, because there is support, widespread support. But yeah, I think both of them made excellent points.
Regarding potential Prout solutions, have any of you given thought to housing cooperatives and public financing of housing cooperatives?
I guess I could share a couple of things. One of the things with programs like Everyone Village is to actually develop industry there, you know, on a cooperative basis. And the intent is to eventually cycle those people, you know, kind of to the point Tapan made. If you don't have a home, you basically become invisible in the current system. You know, it's hard to even apply for work or et cetera, et cetera. And so part of it's to actually give people some skills, you know, that they in a financial base to sort of cycle out of that. The intent is that with Everyone Village, that people aren't there on a permanent basis. Some will become custodians, I think is the intent, but the idea is that those people will eventually cycle out into other opportunities. To the point made about, you know, it's sort of an even earlier stepping stone for some people to just be in housing, period, and then hopefully to evolve to, you know, some kind of affordable rental housing or something, and then eventually to home ownership. But there are some great kind of alternative financing approaches, some of which actually focus on cooperatives, both housing and production type cooperatives. So I think some people are definitely working with those. I know some of us in the Eugene area have been looking very closely at some of those options as well.
Well, can any of you offer some summarizing comments to close us out here?
I think Prakash actually shared the perfect summarizing comment in many ways. That yeah, the issue is fundamental systems change, which is a daunting task.
I was found it Tapan, at the beginning of your presentation, you talked about criteria for that have been established for what ought to be a certain income for percentage of the income that should be spent on housing, and contrasting that with the reality of people's actual incomes and what is actually affordable in a lot of communities now. That I wonder if that can be perhaps a criteria for helping us establish what should be a minimum wage in any community.
Well, so I mean, based on my data, I mean, as you can see right now, the housing wage needs to be like some $25 hourly wage to be able to afford the 2-bedroom, modestly priced home. So we are already like $10 below, $11 below the current minimum wage of not. I mean, some companies pay $15. So we are far below that number. So yeah, and so some areas where I was alluding to Section 8, where the HUD actually pays the difference between the 30%, the gap between 30% and the fair market rent. But there is as I heard from Janak, that there is a huge waiting list for that. So there are some work going on, but I think it is inadequate based on the need. And I think it is going to get worse because of the law of supply and demand. And so I don't know where we are heading, but I think we are heading to a big crisis. it took years to get us here, and then it will take years of sincere effort to really get us out of this mess. But the two solutions that we presented today, on top of that, there are like a housing co-ops, the community land trust. And I think one of our proudest brother from Maine, Alex, who is, I think, in the audience, I heard from him. I think he probably have organized some kind of like a people pulling the money together to buy like a housing apartment complex. So that is one of the solutions. So there are different things that are going on right now, but I do not think that the US government has like a coherent housing policy where allowing people to have one roof over their head. That is not the US government policy right now, and I don't think it is even priority for them. What we are doing is all a piecemeal solution for now.
I'd like to add something. I think that's some excellent points. In many respects, sometimes the most effective approach is at the local level. I just heard that in Austin, especially when COVID had such, the pandemic had such an impact on tourism, many small hotels, motel complexes went out of business, and the city of Austin actually bought some of those facilities and is using it for housing for people that are otherwise living on the street. But sometimes I think you can get more leverage and have more influence at the local level, where you can really get to know, elected officials. And I think Janaka actually raised an excellent point. If people are too far out of what's acceptable, they're vulnerable to being voted out of office. But I think many small communities, again, my experience is elected officials are acutely aware of the challenge, and many of them feel the responsibility for somehow addressing the challenge. And so I think there can be real productive efforts working with them. And I think the other presenters have pointed out some of the things that you can promote in terms of regulatory or legislative or program change that can encourage doing the right thing. And so I think, that the challenge is incredibly complex. And I think it's a multi-pronged effort that has to be mounted to really come up with a viable solution.
Yeah, I think I want to point to one other solution that it's not a technical solution or a complex solution, but an ethical one. Was voiced by the man who spoke, who's in Eugene, who lives in the tent there. He said, "We're all brothers and sisters here. We're all in this together." And that if you look at the communities that are addressing this with solutions that are effective, or organizations that are doing that, it's because they do have that ethic that we're all in this together. Our opposition is coming from, oh, no, we have to all look out for ourselves. And what you do is going to hurt me, rather than, oh, you're hurting, that's hurting me. Instead of like, oh, you're hurting, therefore I don't want to see you because you'll hurt me. Instead of saying, you're hurting, we're all hurting, and we're in this together. So that's it's the most difficult to change, but it's the fundamental one that's driving the situation, is that lack of feeling of a collective feeling of we're all in this together, we're here for each other. And so if we don't address that, all the technical solutions, we really can't really carry them out, except in a small scale. We're creating models that are being generated by people who have those values, but it's the values behind those of us and who are trying to do something, and people who are being successful at doing something, is because they have that core value of looking out for each other.
Thank you, Prakash. I think that is a fundamental insight, and perhaps that will be a good note to close on.